Hi, I'm Kimberly.
And I'm Sherry.
Let us tell you a little bit about our podcast, Lemonade and Sunshine.
We're going to be talking to real people who have made lemonade with the lemons in their lives to help strengthen other people with their challenges.
We all need to know that there's hope and light even on our darkest days. And if you've ever felt alone in your struggles, and who hasn't, come and listen and sip lemonade in the sunshine with us. Welcome back to Lemonade and Sunshine. We are so happy to have you here with us today. The idea for this episode on boundaries actually came from one of our listeners, so we are so grateful for that. And please, any of you who have recommendations or suggestions for us, we'd love to hear them. But Sherry, I wanted to talk about a takeaway from this because we recorded this episode already. But one of my takeaways from this was that setting boundaries, I always thought setting boundaries was being unkind, but Mary actually said the opposite, that it is kind. And what was it exactly that she said, Sherry?
She said, clear is kind.
That's
so
right.
When you tell people what your expectations are and you give them those boundaries and let them know that this is what I expect, this is my values, my standards, then that's actually kind to them because they're not having to guess what it is that you want or need or expect.
Yeah, I love that.
That was great.
That was a big takeaway from me and makes me feel less guilty for setting boundaries. Right. Yeah.
Because we are not professionals in that area.
We're not.
Let's just say that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Mary. So Mary is a clinical mental health counselor and has been practicing since 2019. She has a master's in clinical mental health counseling from Capella University and a bachelor's in philosophy from BYU. She's been trained in several therapeutic modalities, including EMDR, dialectical behavioral therapy, and internal family systems therapy, and sand tray. She's a transplant to St. George, Utah. She grew up around Spokane, Washington, and moved here about 6 years ago. She says she loves being the fun aunt with lots of nieces and nephews, and she loves being out in nature. She loves painting, reading, road trips, and working on, but not necessarily finishing, several DIY Pinterest projects at the same time, which I can totally relate to. She says her perfect day is her on a deserted tropical island with a comfy lounger, a really good book, and endless virgin margaritas. And that sounds pretty good to me. She says not a soul in sight but her fur baby Bucky. And she says, or she would like to be home totally alone, a great audiobook playing while she's working on a new puzzle, still with virgin margaritas that are endless, and Bucky. So I think all of that sounds pretty nice. I'd take that day.
Yeah.
This is such a great day on the podcast today. We are stoked to have Mary with us. She is an expert in so many things, and she's going to talk to us today about setting boundaries. Thank you for joining us, Mary.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Mary, we're so happy to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. In your expert opinion, why do you think setting boundaries is so important? And maybe what happens when we don't set boundaries?
Well, I'll tell you what happens. A lot more whiskey and Prozac, I think. So boundaries have got to be important. It saves money is really what it does. It's just going to save some money. Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And all the therapy bills too, let me tell you.
Right.
Yeah. When I'm talking about boundaries, one really important element that I think cannot be overlooked is that healthy boundaries are always based in our individual and even our collective values. Our individual values are what creates like our sense of self and our sense of self-worth. And they're really like the light that guides us in our decision-making all throughout life. So one kind of analogy that I like to use when talking about boundaries is that, let's say our values are like the flame of a candle, and that flame is what gives us guidance, what lights our path. If we're walking along with just a bare plain candle and you try to walk outside, any breeze, any wind, any jostling, that flame might go out. We'll have to relight it. We'll have to really work to protect that flame. But let's say you put that candle in a candle holder that's deep enough that the flame's fully encased. It's wide enough to allow for oxygen. You'll be able to walk as far as you want, and that light's protected. And that is really what our boundaries are. They are what keeps us safe in connections. They allow us to be vulnerable. They allow us to build relationships. And they're really one of our most powerful tools for discernment and knowing who is safe to connect with.
And who isn't, good for our spirit, body, mind, who might be toxic in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What does it say? And maybe this is another question for later, but what does it say about people who are not good at setting boundaries then? I mean, if it's how we protect ourselves, what is that saying about me that I struggle to set boundaries?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest reasons that people can struggle to set boundaries is because they've never been taught to. And they've instead been taught that, whether it's explicitly taught or those unspoken rules, they've been taught that they aren't allowed to, or it's not kind to set a boundary. And they've been taught that that's not really safe. The other side of the coin is there's lots of us who've had negative experiences. We try to set a boundary and it's been really, really negative. It's been toxic. It's come back at us. Or we've had people in our lives who have used boundaries as weapons against us.
Can you tell us what that might look like?
Absolutely.
How does that look if somebody's using boundaries as a weapon against us?
Yeah. Really, like I said, our boundaries need to be based in values. And they're there. If we're setting a healthy boundary, we're feeling more connected, we're feeling more safe. Weaponizing boundaries looks like using boundaries as a way of controlling and manipulating, saying you can't do that because I don't want you to, rather than when you do that, I don't feel connected to you and I want this relationship. And it can be a means of controlling and manipulation when it's used that way. And then you get those terms like gaslighting and narcissist and manipulator. All those are kind of rooted in someone who is weaponizing boundaries and taking advantage of those who don't necessarily know that that's actually not a healthy boundary.
Right. So people pleasers, people who feel like it's more important to be kind than to say what we feel or think, or maybe we're not valuing ourselves as we should. It's harder for those people to set boundaries, I am imagining.
I mean, I think absolutely there's a lot of struggling with people pleasing and with boundaries. Absolutely. And I think also from the gospel perspective, I think that is one of the kind of big and insidious ways that Satan kind of twists some of that Christ-like kindness and charity, twists the idea of meekness into being a people pleaser, into being overly kind and not firm and not standing up for ourselves and what we value.
We are like the poster children, Kim. We're the two of us are like the poster children for this. I don't know why we had to have this episode. I don't know. It's not for our own gain. Just
Yeah.
Hello.
As I was thinking about boundaries this weekend, I thought about how the first time I really remember knowing I could set a boundary was when I was probably like 15 and had just, the 15-year-old teen drama, me and my friends all fighting all the time and going behind each other's back and gossiping and being just really rotten teenagers. And once again, I was at home crying in my mom's bed, miserable because of whatever the fight had been about that day. And my dad just came in. He didn't usually get involved in that kind of gal drama, but he just popped his head in and he said, Mary, you don't have to be around people who make you miserable. And then he walked out. And my teenage brain exploded. I was like, are you serious? I can choose my friends. It's not just the people that I'm around that I then have to fight with. And I get to decide who is allowed in my inner circle. And that was so liberating to be able to recognize, and liberating for my soul and for my self-esteem. I think that was really the start of when, as a teenager, I started to feel like, I do have value and I have worth, and I can stand up for myself and decide who gets to see that, who gets to experience that.
I love that so much. I think that is so true. And isn't that funny that he popped in, said 5 words or whatever, and was out, and it made such an impact on your
Yeah.
life? I mean, wow. As parents, I don't think we realize what impact we have with just a few words like that. And I'm glad that you got that at that young age. I'm still working on it myself, just because, like everybody, I don't think anybody really loves to have chaos, but I really just want peace at all costs. And so therefore have created a lot of not peace in my own self.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like we sacrifice ourselves so that other people can be happy. I think I've done that most of my life. I've put myself on the back burner, not protecting myself.
And it is very, very hard when you think about the gospel, or even just trying to be Christ-like, and you're thinking, okay, well, 77 times 7.
What about when you set a boundary and then people continue to cross it? Like, that's where I struggle, when I've set a boundary and it's like really clear, and then people just keep crossing. Like, what do you do in those circumstances? And
Okay, so when people cross the line, when they keep coming after you've set the boundary. Yeah, I love that. That happens a lot. That's where we kind of get tripped up with it, right? It happens so often. I think one of the hardest things to learn when we're first learning how to set a boundary and trying to figure out how to enforce these things is that we don't actually have any power to force anybody to act according to our boundaries. We don't get to force them to do what we ask them to do. It's really just a line in the sand. And the only power we have is in how we react when that line is crossed. So enforcing our boundaries is all about enforcing the consequences of our boundaries. And that can be really, really scary, because it does involve having a consequence placed on the relationship. And there's a break there, there's a hurt there, that you have to really put trust in the other person to heal if they want to stay in the relationship.
Oh, that's so scary.
So, I think, example, I love analogies. I love metaphors. So I think about, if I have, a box of cookies, because I love cookies and they're precious to me. If someone comes into my house and takes the last cookie and eats it without asking, I'm going to be hurt. So I say to them, hey, maybe next time, could you please ask me if you want before you take the last cookie, because that hurt my feelings. I was really looking forward to it. And they say, yeah, sure. I'll absolutely ask. They come in, they do it again. I say, hey, you promised me that you wouldn't do that. So now I will be placing the cookies in the pantry on the shelf where you can't reach them. Next time they come over, they sneak into the pantry, take a cookie without asking.
Yeah.
So then I say, okay, so now that you've broken my boundary twice, we are actually not going to be having our little play dates at my house anymore. I can come to your house. And if they're willing to do that, we can go there and we can start rebuilding trust from there. But you're not allowed back in my house until you've rebuilt trust. If you continue to cross the boundary, that's where we need to have limits. When someone has violated our boundaries to the point where they're not allowed into our emotional space anymore. And that can be extremely difficult when it's somebody like a family member who we don't want to cut out from our lives, but they are just not capable of respecting our boundaries. And so we have to be willing to hold those consequences and hold that line and space that they are not allowed to be within my emotional safety limits, because they're just not safe.
it's hard.
Right. And that is hard. That's hard work. And I like that you are saying that you have to be willing to set the consequence and then stand firm in that consequence. And I'm sure that would take some practice. I mean, it wouldn't be easy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're kind of like, when we don't set boundaries, we're actually still setting a boundary. It's just not the boundary we want to set. I always kind of joke when I talk with parents about how do I teach my kids to do these things? And we're talking about helping little kids. And I joke like, either you are teaching your kids or they're teaching you. You're reinforcing a good behavior or they're reinforcing you to let them get away with things. Like one person is doing the work. So if you are not enforcing the boundary and reinforcing that, you need to respect my values, you need to respect me, then what's actually happened is the other person is reinforcing you to say, it doesn't matter. You can take whatever you want. I'm not going to fight back. And even the most kind person will continue to step forward if you don't say to stop. Because that's what we do. We're human.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Wow, that is so interesting. So even people that aren't necessarily, I don't know, innately bad or narcissistic or any of those things will continue to push that because you don't have any kind of guidelines for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've never thought about that before. Wow.
Another little story. I was visiting my brother and his wife a couple years ago, and I brought my little puppy with me. And technically, we weren't supposed to have the dog in their apartment. So we were kind of hiding him in the apartment for the weekend. And I was so tired. And normally I would try to be really good with cleaning up after my puppy, making sure that there was no hair, no food, no nothing around. But that weekend I did kind of just let myself slip. And I didn't keep myself to following my personal kind of boundaries for keeping up with him. And they didn't say anything. So I thought, it's okay. It's just one weekend. I know I left hair in the guest room, but it's okay. It wasn't until the next time I said,
I'm usually really good at it.
Yeah. The next time I went to visit, though, they said, hey, could you not bring the dog? Last time it was really messy and it was really upsetting. And I was like crushed in my soul. And not because I couldn't bring my dog. I'm like, I really don't care. But because they hadn't said anything and I had hurt them and made their lives harder. Because of just my own carelessness and my own, I was just thinking, I'm tired this weekend. And I let it go. And I wish that they had told me sooner. I would have stayed and vacuumed their whole house because it just hurt so bad to know that I And it's really important to set boundaries because we don't know if we're crossing them. And sometimes we don't want to cross them even, but we do.
Well, and on the other hand, when people do cross boundaries, for me, one thought that I had is if people cross it, I make excuses for them. Like, well, they just forgot or they this or that. And I mean, I subscribe to I want to be merciful with other people because I want to have mercy and give people the benefit of the doubt. But at some point, though, it just can't keep going on, right? I mean, you have to cut it off at some point.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what I was wondering about. How do we rectify or justify setting boundaries and then also like Christian or gospel principles of, you turn your cheek 77 times 7 times and you would need to be Christ-like, and Christ was always kind. And I don't think you have to be necessarily unkind to set boundaries, but you do have to have a backbone and be firm and be willing to hold somebody to those things. And that's hard. So how do we, I don't want to say rectify, but how does that work out in the balance of being Christ-like and also setting boundaries?
Well, I mean, my favorite story of Christ was him going into that temple and flipping those tables and kicking out those money changers. And, he was not tolerating that, not in his watch, in his temple. So, I think being Christ-like, there's a spectrum there. And he really did set the example of how to lovingly set a boundary with acceptance, with empathy, and then also know when the limit has reached and when it's not okay. And we need to be a little bit more firm and a little bit more aggressive, maybe, with setting that boundary.
Right.
I think one of my favorite words when setting boundaries is the word and. And is a magical word because it can help us bridge the gap between this hurt me, but I can understand something was going on, and it's not okay for me to have you do that. Please don't do that again. Which really is the example Christ set. Whenever he was working with someone, he wasn't saying, hey, it's okay. I know that you sinned. Don't worry about it. I know something was going on. He says, like, I get that something was going on, but don't sin again. He really did a good job of teaching us how to balance that it's not about, well, I guess I'd phrase it this way. We need to have empathy. In order to set healthy boundaries, we need that empathy. We need that validation for the other side. And it's okay to say,
Right.
I recognize things were happening because I'm human and I get it. And I also respect you and myself enough to say that wasn't okay and I expect better of you. Then we can repair our relationship. We can reconnect. And it's that cycle of, hurting each other, having that break, repairing and reconnecting. That is what builds relationships. Just like building muscle. To get a deeper, more connected relationship, we have to be willing to hurt each other, not on accident, on purpose, but then be willing to repair, come back, fix it, grow, change. All of that is initiated through boundaries and through holding them and holding those consequences.
I guess for me, the fear is just that it will be irreparable damage.
Yeah.
And that you would lose a relationship. And I never want to lose a relationship. So that is so fearful to me. That scares me so bad. And so at all cost, I will avoid it so that I don't lose that relationship.
Absolutely.
So what's wrong with me, Mary?
A lot. We don't have time. No, just joking.
I was going to say, I was literally going to say, she's going to say, we don't have that kind of time. How long is this podcast? 8 hours? Is this a series? What are we doing? Oh my gosh. But I mean, really, that's terrifying.
I don't think you're alone in that, Sherry. I feel like that too.
No. And I think it can feel really overwhelming when you haven't been setting boundaries to then kind of look at what's going on and say like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? How do I put these things back in place when, dam's already broke. Can't rebuild it now.
They've never been there.
So,
right.
I think it is important to remember that it's one step at a time. We actually shouldn't be mad at someone for crossing boundaries that we've never set with them. One of the biggest traps that we fall into is that we don't say anything and it builds and we get resentful, we get angry, and then we explode. Mm-hmm. And we go into that like, you always do this or you never do this. And we bring up all of the past ways that they've hurt us.
Right.
And we can mistake that for setting a boundary. That's actually not setting a boundary. That's having a temper tantrum and bringing up all the past hurts. Mm-hmm. We can only set boundaries moving forward. And so it's one step at a time. It's dealing with the behavior in front of you, with whatever just happened. Hey, I don't appreciate that. It doesn't matter if they've done it 12 million times in the past. Starting today, could you not do that? And it takes time to shape those boundaries when we've never held them, because we can't expect the other person to change overnight either.
Right. And there are habits and, dances that we do with particular people in relationships. So those dances aren't going to change fast.
No.
And and I think that would be the hard thing, is that when we get shot down or whatever, or the boundary gets broken, then we're like, well, I give up. I tried. That's so hard. I'm not going to do that. I know with a sister of mine, I had to set boundaries over and over again. And it was so hard because she's older than me and I didn't want to do it. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I kept having to. And I was like, oh my gosh, why do I keep having to put these up? And it was very, very hard. There was like a family dynamic to it that made it really difficult. And I just kept having to put them up. And it was really hard to keep doing it. I was just like, ugh, it would be so much easier just to go into the old, I'm the younger sister pattern.
Yeah.
I get mad. Like, why are they forcing me to do this? Because for some reason, I feel like it's being mean. Like when you talked about, you feel like it's not kind or whatever to set boundaries sometimes. Like there are times when I feel like that. I guess maybe it's just I have a hard time asserting myself.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm going to take a guess here that if I were to ask you what your list of top values were, that you probably wouldn't write myself on that list.
She would not.
And that's where a lot of us fall into that of like, oh, I value family, I value God, I value kindness. We don't put ourselves on that list because that wouldn't be kind, that would be selfish. And that is doing a disservice to ourselves. We need to value ourselves and our own space as much as we value the space of the people in our lives. I guess a couple helpful ways to reframe it in your mind if you're a people pleaser and you struggle with the unkindness sometimes of setting a boundary. First, one of my favorite little phrases that I hear a lot and I say a lot is clear is kind. It's more kind to be clear in what you expect and what you want. And that is true in any situation, whether it's at a work thing, relationship, kid, mom, dad, any situation. If I'm clear about what I want and they're clear about what they want from me, it's far more kind. And we can be realistic and plan what we're actually going to do and what this is going to look like. If those boundaries are unclear, it leaves either one of us or both of us worried, anxious, not sure where to go.
Okay, just a quick observation. Sherry and I, both of our husbands are very clear. I feel like, tell me if I'm right, Sherry. My husband is very clear in his expectations and in expressing himself, and like everyone I feel like knows where he stands on things. So I just think it's interesting that Sherry and I are very similar in people pleasing and that they don't really care if they're pleasing anybody. And so it's like opposite, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we can combine it.
We're always like, oh no, he didn't really mean that. Yeah. He put us in a bag, shake us up.
Yeah.
We make one decent person.
That's what marriage is though, right? We got to make one decent person out of us and get back somehow.
Yeah. But Sherry was saying we do apologize, like, oh no, he didn't mean that. Or we went to church and there was this new couple that was there and the guy spoke. And right afterwards, we went into Sunday school and he was sitting there with his wife. And I didn't know, but Bruno had played basketball with the guy. And so he had met him before. But he said to the girl, they both had spoken, the husband and wife. And he said, you gave a great talk, but that guy that went after you, and he said, like, I don't know, he was giving the guy a hard time and he's laughing and the girl looked horrified and I was horrified. And I'm like, he's just kidding, you know, like apologizing or whatever.
Which is where I would say the therapist coming out in me, that you took away the consequences of his like boundary and his action. You know, if we're acting in a way that's going to have a relational consequence where they don't like me anymore, that's how we learn. And so by stepping in and shielding him from that, he doesn't learn to be kind and setting values. He just continues to say them in boundaries. I mean, not values. But he just continues to say them in the brash, logical way that he wants to, because nobody's ever told him.
Yeah. Well, and I make cookies for people too, if I feel like when you taught, when you taught Sunday.
Yeah. Poster children. We are poster children.
When he taught Sunday school,
oh my gosh.
if he like, I felt like he'd gone too far teasing someone, I would bring them cookies.
Hello. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And so he actually gave a talk one time and he's like, I'm just going to say that Kimberly is not going to bring cookies anymore. And so if I offend you, you bring me cookies. And we had people bring us. We had like several people bring us cookies.
Oh my gosh.
So
that's hilarious. You bring me cookies. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I had that happen in Sunday school. He said something and I was just like mortified. He called everybody sheep in the room. You're all sheep. And I was like, oh, how much room is under this chair? I need to get under here. And then 2 weeks later, he came and apologized. They are the same men. What the heck? They're the same men. We're the
That's
same women. It's
hilarious.
bizarro land. Yeah, so funny. What's another one of your questions, Kim?
Let's see. Is it possible to set boundaries in a loving and firm way?
Yes, yes, it is. And that's where I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that we want to use that and think about how we can combine that empathy, that validation for, I can understand that maybe I've never said this before, or I can understand that maybe you're having a hard day. And when this happened, when you did this, it hurt me. It wasn't okay. And I really need you to not do that anymore. Or could you please try something different?
Right. Mary, did you finish your tips? So we have clear is kind.
Oh.
And then was there more?
The other one that I wanted to talk about, which actually I think ties into this question really well, is that a helpful strategy is to phrase the boundary really in terms of the positive gained versus the negative of the boundary. Sometimes it can feel like I'm giving you a rule, I'm giving you a limitation on our friendship. And so we don't want to set that boundary. But really, there's a lot of positive to be gained in setting boundaries. So, for example, we'll use the people pleaser mentality again. If I'm asked to, maybe take on a project at work for whatever reason, and I don't really want to, which, by the way, it's okay to say no just because you don't want to do something. You don't have to have a reason beyond that. I know it's amazing, but you can do it. You are allowed to say no just because I don't want to.
You don't have to give like 10 excuses for why you can't.
You don't have to be, in full-on crisis mode, trucking across the galaxy with, I don't know, a million things to do. You can just say, I'm busy, no, or I'm not busy, but no.
Yeah. So phrase the boundary in the positive. Like?
So it would be like saying, hey, thank you for asking me to do that project, but if I were to take that on right now, it would really disrupt my plans for today. And it would leave me feeling less energized, less productive when I do come back to work. And so because I want to be able to work hard when I'm here and I want to be able to give my all, it's really important for me to put the same amount of energy into my non-work time. So no, I'm not going to take that on right now.
Wow.
And it's really understanding that when I say no, it's actually going to create more space in our relationship for me to say yes later, to feel more connected, to want to give more later, because I'm not building up resentment. I'm not burning myself out. I'm not taking on more than I can actually manage, which will actually erode the relationship and leads to that bitterness, that resentment, that anger, because I've done more than I can handle.
Oh my gosh, for sure. And then you're resenting them. They don't even know why. You're mad.
Yeah.
It's caused a riff in the relationship. They don't understand what's going on. They've never had a clue that you were bugged about it. Just like you said about the dog and the hair, like if you could go back in time, what you would have done to make them not feel that way about your sweet baby boy. That is so good, Mary. So good. I love that. Yeah. So if you think about it in those terms, I think it's always easier to think about you're doing this kind of for someone else. I mean, really, that's kind of, I don't know, that's the whatever my disease is. But I think if we think about in the long run, that's going to help them and that's going to help the whole relationship. A lot of times my husband will say, I don't know why you get so mad at me. Like other people can say this or other people can do that. And I'm like, but this is the most important relationship to me. So I am willing to fight for it. It has to get ugly sometimes and it has to get dirty sometimes to get through these things. And it means that much to me, which seems weird, but that's kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think a lot of people struggle with setting boundaries at work, just in talking to different people where they do way more than what is expected of them. They take on way more. They're doing the work of 2 people, 3 people. They're working through their lunch. They're staying late, different things like that. And I think those boundaries will be really helpful to apply in a work situation if there's any people that are dealing with that. So what do we do when we have people in our lives who don't respect the boundaries we have set? I mean, I feel like kids do that. Kids don't respect the boundaries and they're learning. So what does that say about people who don't respect boundaries, who are adults maybe, right? Because I mean, kids are learning, so they kind of have an excuse why they're pushing those boundaries. But what does that say about people that do that to us who are adults?
Yeah. We've so far really been talking about boundaries in terms of those relationships that are, for the most part, healthy and normal, in that, you do something that is not okay with me and I set the boundary and we repair and we work together. And we're not perfect, but we try to get closer to the mark each time. But there are those relationships, and I mean, we could do so much more on those relationships of where the person just really is not capable or unwilling to make the changes and to respect those boundaries. And they continue to push and push and push. A lot of times those individuals in our lives do actually lack the emotional maturity to respect the boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever's happened to them, whatever they've been through, whatever's going on internally, they for some reason have not grown to be able to do that. And that's where we get those people in our lives who are highly manipulative, highly emotional. They do kind of, make it maybe all about them, or it's similar to dealing with, when this person's emotional, I'm dealing with a 4-year-old, or I feel like I'm dealing with a 13-year-old. Not an adult. And setting boundaries with those individuals is a little bit different, because you do get burnt out if you continue to try to set the boundary and they continue to cross it and cross it and cross it. And that is where we do have to set limits and internal boundaries on what that person is able to access within us.
How much are we willing to let that person disrupt our life? And at what point do we say, okay, enough's enough. I'm done. I just can't go on with this relationship as it is right now. So I either need to take a break, or I need to, for my own self well-being, I have to walk away.
Yeah.
Right?
We have to, and even if it's not fully walking away, we have to set up boundaries for ourselves that will protect us, will protect our, for parents, will protect our children, will protect our family, those that we care about. We need to be willing to set those boundaries and not cross them, because that person is not going to respect those boundaries. So, but setting boundaries like, I only visit you in these locations, I only stay this long, I only talk about these things with you.
Right.
And that can be really hard. I think that's where a lot of us feel like we have that person in our family sometimes that is really hard, and we'll push and push and push. And it hurts because we keep trying to set boundaries, keep trying to get them to change and do better. And it's just not working. So that's where we have to set our own boundaries and say, what space do I allow this person in? And how do I protect that space so that the time we're together is safe for me, is safe for the people with me, and isn't further damaging to our relationship.
Right. So let's pretend that we are able to set healthy boundaries for our relationships. I mean, I'm sure the relationships are individual and it's going to take some time, and some are going to be easier and some are going to be harder to do. But let's say that we're able to accomplish these things and slowly get healthy boundaries for ourselves in our lives. What are the blessings that we will see from that, Mary?
Well, I think number one, you'll see an increase in the depth of your connection with that person. You'll be able to be more vulnerable with each other. And really, you'll be able to feel more, I think it just feels more authentic to set boundaries, because we're living by our values. We're showing our values. And that really is like the most Christ-like way we can live, is to live according to those values and to stand up for them. Another blessing that comes, I think the payout, is that over time, we don't have to set the boundaries as often or as firmly, because they become the norm. And we start to reap the benefits as we be doing it. And it just becomes a thing where people know, I don't do that around her because she doesn't accept it. And I treat her this way because that's what she expects. And then our life becomes so much
Right.
easier.
Well, and I love that saying that we teach people how to treat us. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And if we've taught them over time, then we don't have to keep doing it. It's less mentally and emotionally exhausting for us, for sure, and probably for them too. They know what to expect. No one's guessing, and it makes things easier.
Yeah. We can get to living. We can get to connecting and doing things. We don't have to go through setting the rules out down every time. We just jump in and play and do things.
Right. Anything else, Kim?
I don't know. I think we covered our questions that we have, but I just have loved this. I know we're running out of time, but I want to keep talking.
I know, and I want to just go back and listen again because I've been writing notes. I've been writing notes as we've been going, but there's so much here that we could learn and do better, and I've loved it too. It's awesome.
Yeah, I've loved it. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love talking about boundaries. I love talking about healthy relationships. There's so much. I could go on and on about it because I think it's just so essential.
We're so happy you're here, Mary. Thank you very, very, very much. We appreciate it. You're awesome. Thanks for putting up with our technology as per the usual for us.
Absolutely.
It's been wonderful to meet you, Mary. Thank you.
We would love to hear from you.
Yes, we really would. So please give us your feedback
And let us know if there's any topics you'd like us to cover.
and how you have found the sunshine with the lemons in your lives.
And how do they give us feedback, Kimberly?
You can find us, Lemonade and Sunshine, on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple iTunes. Please give us a review and rating. It really helps us as a new show.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely does. So until next time, we hope that you can feel the sunshine.
And we hope you will tune in next week to Lemonade and Sunshine.